Hello, friends. Welcome to Science Talk. I am your host and resident oceanographer, Jim Massa. Okay, I want to discuss with you, it just came out in October in phys.org, study growing potential for toxic algal blooms in the Alaskan Arctic. And this is through Huai, Woodhull Oceanographic Institution. So what do we see here? We got a nice photo of a CTD, conductivity, temperature, and density. Important tool that us oceanographers use to help construct vertical profiles of the ocean, and as well as we take the vertical profile and create horizontal transects of such things as what is the temperature, what is the salinity, what is the density, etc. Conductivity measures, basically in Siemens, the ionic strength and so forth, and along with the temperature, we use that to calculate the salinity. Then we take the salinity along with the temperature, we calculate the density. So from conductivity and temperature, we're able to create salinity and density profiles. It was a very important piece of machinery, and you got all sorts of fancy software nowadays in there. So this is a particularly larger CTD. They come in all different sizes, trust me. So you lower this, and it takes the measurements as you lower it down to go through the water column, down through depth, and so forth. You then download the data, and all those calculations take place. What's going on here? Changes in the northern Alaskan Arctic Ocean environment have reached a point at which a previously rare phenomenon, widespread blooms of toxic algae, could become more commonplace. This can potentially threaten a wide range of marine wildlife and the people who rely on local marine resources for food. This is the conclusion of a new study about harmful algal blooms, HABs, of the toxic algae Alexandrium catenella, being published in the journal Proceedings of the National Academy of Science. Study led by scientists at Woodhull Oceanographic Institution in collaboration with colleagues from the National Oceanic Atmospheric Administration, NOAA, other researchers in the US, Japan, and China, looked at samples from seafloor sediments and surface waters collected during 2018 and 2019 in a region extending from the northern Bering Sea to the Chukchi and Beaufort Seas north of Alaska. Okay, northern Bering Sea going through the Bering Strait to the Chukchi. You then take you go east, and then the Beaufort Seas area north of Alaska, which will, if you go further east, you then cross the border into the Yukon, Northwest Territories, and so on. So that's basically the region they were at. Now, I wish they mentioned it when I talk about other researchers in the US, Japan, and China. These are researchers from the International Arctic Research Center, where I worked. So they were involved in this. The sediment samples allowed the researchers to count and map Alexandrium cis, which is sort of like a seed-like spore, if you will. Typically it's dormant. It waits for appropriate conditions to be present, in which case it then germinates. Basically, it opens up. The newly germinated cells swim to the surface. They multiply using the sun's energy, and you have a bloom, a growth of algal material. This bloom can be dangerous due to the family of potent neurotoxins called saxitoxins that the free-swimming cells produce. Not at all different from when the dinoflagellates bloom. You have the red tide, and you get the you get the shellfish poisoning. I'm tripping over my tongue right now, but the PSP. You get that shellfish poisoning. Although microscopic algae in the ocean are most often beneficial and serve as the base of the marine food web, some species produce these neurotoxins that can directly and indirectly affect humans and wildlife. When the Alexandrium cells are consumed by shellfish, some fish, these toxins can accumulate to levels that can be dangerous to humans and wildlife. It's called a bioaccumulation, basically, where as you go up each trophic level, the toxicity, the concentration increases, and sometimes it increases to the result that it's harmful to whatever organism ingests it. Okay, and result in the human syndrome called, oh, there it is, paralytic shellfish poisoning, with symptoms ranging from tingling lips to respiratory distress to death. Lots of well, that's kind of a bad symptom. In fish, toxin levels can be highest in digestive and excretory organs, stomach, kidney, liver, but low in muscle and roe is basically the eggs. Toxin can cause illness, mortality to marine wildlife, larger fish, marine mammals, seabirds. So this is a particular concern for members of coastal communities in northern western Alaska who rely on a variety of marine resources for food. Many communities get a lot of their protein from the oceans, fish, whales. Even if some of the Inuits hunt whales, and whales are like the bowheads, they're plankton feeders. So it's a concern. We've known about human and marine wildlife health risks associated with Alexandrium and its toxins in Alaskan waters for a long time, including occasional events north of the Bering Strait. But these results show increased potential for large and recurrent blooms of the species as a new hazard for Alaska's Arctic. And that's a statement by Dawn Anderson, who's a senior scientist and director of the U.S. National Office for HABs at Woods Hole, and he was the principal investigator. Excuse me. The rapid warming that we're seeing all across the Arctic is setting the stage for dangerous bloom events in the waters of western and northern Alaska that we formerly thought were too cold for significant germination and growth. Let me highlight that. Let's go over that again. That is a significant statement. The rapid warming that we're seeing all across the Arctic is setting the stage for dangerous bloom events in the waters of western northern Alaska that we formerly thought were too cold for significant germination and growth. The warming. All right, the Arctic is warming, folks. And this also includes what's happening in the ocean. In fact, if you look, for example, at the Gulf of Alaska, there's been a major shift in the dominant phytoplankton species. It used to be diatoms. Well, the waters have warmed up to the point that the diatoms are being replaced by a group that we call coccolithophorids, or coccoliths for short. They are phytoplankton that prefer warmer water temperatures. When you have that switch, that's going to affect the food web. Well, these warmer waters will help promote the growth and bloom and spread of such species as Alexandrium. So there are things going on in the Arctic. Alexandria are part of a group of single-cell organisms found in oceans, lake worldwide, dinoflagellates, because they have a flagella, which is kind of an extension of the space of the cytoplasm, and they whip it around and helps them move. Okay? Alexandrium cells settle on the seafloor where they can remain inactive for decades, waiting for water temperatures to become favorable for them to germinate and take on the free-swimming form. So they're carried by currents. And if they're in the cystic form, they may settle out the water column, settle on the substrate. Now, they're going to be spread, pretty much anywhere by currents. If they, in the past, if they settled onto the floor of, say, the Bering Sea, it was too cold for them to do anything, and they just stayed there. Well, some of those that are now germinating probably have been there for quite some time, and now the waters are warm enough that they can germinate. And as I discussed in my sea ice melt explained videos, we know that the inflow of water from the Pacific through the Bering Strait into the Arctic Ocean is warmer, and it stands to reason that those warmer waters are helping to contribute to the significant increase in germination of Alexandria. As the climate has warmed, a significant and ongoing reduction in extent and duration of seasonal ice cover along the coast of western northern Alaska has resulted in dramatic changes, said Bob Pickard, who is a Woods Hole physical oceanographer and a co-principal investigator. These include warming temperatures due to local heating of ice-free water, as well as increased influx of warmer, fresher water from the Pacific flowing north through the Bering Strait into the Chukchi Sea. Okay, we know it's warmer. I question that. The Pacific Ocean has a higher salinity than the Arctic Ocean. Now, if they're referring to riverine input, then okay, that would be valid. But we know, and I covered this, based on the work of Rebecca Woodgate, we know that the water coming in through the Bering Strait into the Arctic Ocean is warmer, but it's also Pacific water, so the salinity is about 32, 33 parts, which is still higher than what's in the Arctic Ocean. In addition, atmospheric conditions and less seasonal sea ice means organisms that rely on sunlight to grow, including Alexandria, are able to thrive and multiply. As a result of this and related changes, the Arctic Ocean ecosystem is witnessing an unprecedented regime shift. When you see words like that in a scientific paper, do not ignore it. That is a very profound, loaded statement full of major implications. Just as I described a few moments ago about the change in the phytoplankton community in the Gulf of Alaska from diatoms to coccolithophorids, okay, that is a regime shift. They're talking another regime shift basically around the Alaska Peninsula into the Bering and the Arctic Ocean. This is quite a statement. Among these shifts is both the timing favorability of ocean conditions that promote the germination of Alexandrium cysts on the seafloor in the Ledyard Bay area of the northeast Chukchi Sea. Previously, Alexandrium was known to exist in the Chukchi Sea as dormant cysts or as bloom cells thought to be carried north through the Bering Strait from populations that originated in southeastern Alaska, the Aleutian Islands, or the east coast of Russia. The fast north-flowing currents through the narrow Bering Strait slow near the Ledyard Bay, allowing these cysts to settle to the floor. Over time, they get dense, there's large beds of them, and the result. Formerly, water temperatures on the seafloor were thought to be too cold to allow significant germination to inoculate local blooms. However, the authors demonstrate that warming over the last 2 decades has increased bottom water temperatures in Ledyard Bay and nearby waters by nearly 2°C. Holy crap. I mean, think about it. That is what? Think about the specific heat of water, how it takes so much more energy to increase the temperature of water 1 degree C for a given volume than it does for the same given volume of air. You need far less energy to increase it 1 degree C. And remember, the oceans have absorbed what? 93% of greenhouse gases over the last 1971, last 50 years. 93% to the tune of 226 zettajoules. So this increase is sufficient to double the flux of germinated cells from the seafloor and also speeds up the process, which means they can reproduce faster, increase the numbers, faster, so you get a higher numbers, you get increased biomass, so that the blooms take place and they become more widespread, more extensive. So they advance the bloom initiation by almost 3 weeks. In other words, the bloom takes place 3 weeks earlier, or almost 3 weeks earlier, and therefore lengthening the window for favorable growth. Remember, I talked about how, you know, the ice-free season is extending. It's gone from like 5 months to over 7 months, where you have all this warm water melting the ice. So now these are creating favorable conditions for this group of uh, cells here, group of algae, the Alexandrium, that they can now uh, germinate, they can reproduce, they can now reproduce rapidly, they can spread rapidly, and they have longer time duration to do those things. So the result is increased potential for large blooms, as well as actually documenting the large blooms. And of course, then they produce the dangerous levels of PCP toxins that get into the food web and pose dangers to people trying to consume such matters. What we're seeing now are very different Arctic Ocean conditions than anyone in living memory has known, said Anderson. We've learned from the Gulf of Maine in the Atlantic Ocean how to monitor and manage Alexandrian bloom events and how to sustain commercial and recreational fisheries in the face of HABs. But navigating this new Alaskan Arctic HAB problem is going to take a great deal of targeted research, more attention to the food security of coastal residents, etc. The threat is clear, but we don't yet know the extent to which the toxin will ultimately lead to increased human exposure or to impact on the health of wildlife at all levels of the food web, said Kathy Lefebvre, who is a research biologist at NOAA's Northwest Fisheries Science Center. And she's working with Anderson, leading a parallel study looking at the Alaskan subsistence communities, effects, concentrations, and movements of these toxins. So this is a new stress on the northern marine ecosystem, in addition to all the stress brought on by changes in the physical parameters. Well, you change the physical parameters, we're now changing what happens to the organisms, how they are affected. So there is a saying that we have in oceanography that the physics drive the biology. And that's what we're seeing. We're changing the physical parameters, and now that is changing the biological parameter, is changing how organisms respond to the physical forcings, the changing physical forcings. So this is major concern here. And, this is all part of what's happening as we warm the planet. It isn't just, you're going to have warmer temperatures and you're going to have more, nasty storms and flooding and maybe droughts and fires. It's also you're changing the ecosystem, you're changing food web dynamics, and this can, directly impact the welfare, the well-being of humans, especially if they rely on getting a good portion of their protein from the oceans, and now that food source is tainted. Yes, humans face a threat from, fires and flash floods, those sort of things. But when you affect the food, you change the climate and you affect the food, that is another source. You've heard me say that you stratify the ocean, you change, whether you got upwellings or you have even a coastal area, if it's stratified, you're not going to necessarily get the mixing for productivity. So the productivity decline, that's less food available for people to harvest and eat. Well, we got that issue. And now let's toss in, well, even if you could harvest the food, you might be eating poisonous material. So this is one of these stories that we got to keep an eye on and see what happens. But here's another example of, not knowing what can happen and a unanticipated result of human activities and what we're doing to the planet, what we're doing to the climate. So, interesting? Stay tuned. Hello, folks. This is Jim here with Science Talk, asking you to please subscribe to my channel and to inform others of my channel and of the work that I do. Please share to social media platforms that you use. Also, as a reminder, don't forget to click the bell so that you know when I load up more videos. Finally, I ask that you support the work that I do by becoming a patron at patreon.com. Details in the description box below. Thank you for your support.